Jake Morrison stood in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom at 2 in the morning, watching the gentle rise and fall of her chest as she slept. Emma's dark hair spilled across the pillow, one arm wrapped around the stuffed elephant she'd had since she was 2, and in the dim glow of her nightlight she looked so peaceful that his heart ached. In his other hand, he held the envelope that had arrived that afternoon, the one with the law firm's return address, the one containing papers that made everything final. Divorced. Single. Alone except for this small person who depended on him for everything. He made a promise standing there in the darkness, a silent vow that felt as binding as any wedding oath he'd ever spoken. No woman would ever hurt his daughter again. No one would waltz into their lives and make Emma love them, only to leave when things got hard. And no one, absolutely no one, would ever make Jake Morrison vulnerable enough to shatter the way his ex-wife had shattered him. They were fine, just the two of them. They didn't need anyone else. It had been 2 years since Rebecca left, 2 years since Emma was 4 years old, and asking why Mommy didn't live with them anymore. Why Mommy had a new house with a new man who wasn't Daddy. 2 years of Jake learning to braid hair through YouTube videos, of burning breakfast and ordering too much pizza, of figuring out how to be both parents at once. He'd restructured his entire life around Emma, shifted his graphic design work to freelance so he could do school drop-offs and pickups, learn the names of all her stuffed animals, became an expert in first-grade social dynamics and which kids were nice and which ones pushed on the playground. Some mornings he woke up exhausted before the day even started. But then Emma would pad into his room with her hair sticking up in every direction, crawl into bed beside him, and say "Good morning, Daddy" in that sleepy voice. And he'd remember why he did it. She was worth every sacrifice, every lonely night, every moment of doubt. The parent-teacher conference notice had come home in Emma's backpack 3 days ago, folded into the pocket of her folder alongside a spelling test with a gold star and a drawing of what appeared to be their cat, but could have been a potato. Jake had stared at the notice with the same enthusiasm he reserved for dentist appointments. He knew these meetings were important, knew he needed to stay involved in Emma's education, but sitting in a tiny chair made for 6-year-olds while a teacher recited things he already knew about his daughter felt like just another item on an endless list of things single parents had to do alone. But he went. Of course he went, because that's what you did when you were all your kid had. Jefferson Elementary hadn't changed much since Jake had attended it himself 25 years ago. Same glossy hallways that smelled like industrial cleaner and cafeteria food. Same construction paper decorations on every door. Same tiny chairs that made adult humans feel like giants. He followed the signs to room 14, Emma's classroom, passing other parents who looked as tired as he felt. At least he wasn't the only one doing this on a Thursday evening when he'd rather be home. Room 14's door was decorated with paper autumn leaves, each one labeled with a student's name and something they were thankful for. Jake spotted Emma's immediately purple and orange, her favorite colors, with "I am thankful for my daddy and my cat, Mr. Whiskers," written in her careful first-grade handwriting. Something in his chest squeezed. He knocked and pushed the door open. The woman who stood from behind the desk wasn't what he expected. Jake had pictured someone older, maybe with reading glasses on a chain and sensible shoes. Miss Chen, he'd seen her name on the conference notice, looked barely older than some of his college friends. Late 20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, wearing a blue cardigan over a simple dress, and when she smiled it reached her eyes in a way that seemed genuine. "Mr. Morrison?" She extended her hand. "I'm Sarah Chen. It's so wonderful to finally meet you. Please, sit." She gestured to one of 2 adult-sized chairs she'd set up clearly. She'd anticipated the absurdity of grown men trying to fold themselves into first-grade furniture. Jake shook her hand, noting the firm grip, and sat down. The classroom smelled like crayons, and that specific scent of elementary school that triggered memories he'd long forgotten. "Emma talks about you constantly," Sarah said, and there was warmth in her voice that caught him off guard. "You're quite the hero in her eyes." Jake felt his defenses soften slightly despite himself. "She's a good kid. Doesn't give me too much trouble." "She's wonderful," Sarah said, and the way she said it like she really meant it, like Emma was more than just another student in a class of 20, made Jake look at her more carefully. "I wanted to meet with you because I think Emma is really special. She's bright, incredibly creative, and she has this empathy that you don't always see in 6-year-olds. When another student is upset, Emma is the first one there trying to help." She pulled out a folder and opened it, showing Jake a collection of Emma's work. Math worksheets with gold stars. A story about a princess who saved herself from a dragon by teaching it to be nice. drawing so many drawings of stick figures labeled Daddy and Emma, always holding hands, always smiling. She draws you too a lot, Sarah said softly, and Jake heard something in her voice. Understanding, maybe. She talks about your breakfasts together, about how you play games at night, about how you help her practice reading even though you both get silly with the voices. Jake stared at the drawings. There was one of them at the park, one of them making pancakes, one of them reading together on the couch. In every single picture, it was just the two of them. No one else, just a dad and his daughter against the world. I want you to know that Emma is doing really well academically, Sarah continued. But more than that, she's happy. And in my experience, happy kids don't come from nowhere. She talks about you with so much love. Whatever you're doing, Mr. Morrison, it's working. Something cracked in Jake's carefully constructed armor. He'd spent 2 years wondering if he was enough, if Emma would grow up damaged from having only one parent, if he was failing her by not being able to give her the family she deserved. And here was this teacher, this stranger who spent more waking hours with his daughter than he did telling him he was doing okay. Thank you, he said, and his voice came out rougher than he intended. That means more than you know. They talked for another 20 minutes, long past the 15-minute slot he'd been assigned. Sarah showed him Emma's reading progress, her social dynamics with other students, her particular love for art class. She mentioned that Emma stayed after sometimes to help clean up, that she'd noticed Emma watching the other kids get picked up by both parents with something wistful in her eyes. I don't want to overstep, Sarah said carefully, but I've seen that look before. Emma doesn't talk about her mother, ever, and I haven't pressed. But I want you to know that if she ever needs extra support, or if there's anything I should be aware of, my door is always open. Jake found himself telling her things he hadn't planned to share. About the divorce, about Rebecca leaving for someone else, someone with more money and more time and less baggage. About how Emma had cried every night for 3 months, asking when Mommy was coming home. About how he'd promised himself he'd be enough, that they'd be fine, just the two of them. Sarah listened without judgment, her brown eyes steady and kind. You're doing an incredible job, she said when he finished. Emma's lucky to have you. Walking to his car afterward, Jake felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not quite hope, but maybe the memory of what hope used to feel like. Emma's teacher saw his daughter, really saw her, cared about her. That mattered more than he knew how to express. Over the next few weeks, Jake started noticing things he'd been too wrapped up in survival mode to see. Notes came home in Emma's folder, little encouraging messages from Miss Chen about how well Emma had done in reading group, or how creative her art project was, or how she'd helped another student who was struggling. These weren't generic teacher notes. They were personal, specific, like Sarah actually paid attention to his daughter as an individual. Emma herself became obsessed. It was Miss Chen this, and Miss Chen that at every dinner. Miss Chen had worn the prettiest dress today. Miss Chen had read them the funniest story. Miss Chen had helped her sound out a hard word and didn't make her feel dumb when she got it wrong. Miss Chen had laughed at her joke. Daddy, do you think Miss Chen is pretty? Emma asked one night over chicken nuggets, her favorite meal that Jake had learned to make from scratch because the frozen ones never tasted right. Jake nearly choked on his water. What, Miss Chen, do you think she's pretty? I haven't really thought about it, Em. Emma gave him a look that said she didn't believe him. She was 6, but sometimes seemed far older. She doesn't have a family, she told us. She lives by herself with just books and a plant named Fred. A plant named Fred? Uh-huh. She showed us a picture. I think that's sad. Everyone should have a family. Jake's heart twisted. Some people are happy by themselves, sweetheart. Are you happy by yourself? The question landed like a punch. Jake looked at his daughter, at her serious little face, and tried to figure out how to explain that happiness was more complicated than yes or no, that he was happy when he was with her, that she was enough, but that late at night when she was asleep, sometimes the house felt too quiet and too big and too empty. I'm happy with you, he said, which was true even if it wasn't the whole truth. Emma seemed satisfied with that answer, but over the following days, Jake noticed something shifting in how he thought about Miss Chen. He started attending school events he might have skipped before the fall festival, the book fair, the Friday morning assembly where Emma's class sang a song about autumn leaves. And yes, he noticed Sarah, noticed how patient she was with the kids who struggled, noticed how she remembered every parent's name, noticed the way she threw her head back when she laughed, unself-conscious and genuine. He noticed, and that terrified him. His mother didn't help. "You can't lock yourself away forever, Jake," she'd said over the phone when he'd mentioned Emma's teacher in passing, stupid enough to let slip that she was nice. "Emma needs to see healthy relationships. She needs to know that love doesn't always end badly." "She's 6, Mom, and her teacher. It's wildly inappropriate. I'm not saying marry the woman. I'm saying maybe you could remember what it feels like to be human instead of just dad." But Jake had made a promise. No one would get close enough to hurt them again. It was safer that way, simpler. He could handle lonely. He couldn't handle watching Emma's heart break again. Then Emma came home on a Tuesday afternoon with something clutched in her hands, barely able to contain her excitement as she burst through the door. "Daddy, Daddy, look what I made." It was a construction paper card, folded in half, covered in stickers and drawings. On the front, in Emma's careful printing, "You are invited to my birthday party." Jake's stomach dropped. Your birthday isn't for 2 more weeks, I know. I made it early so I could give it to Miss Chen." She said, "Yes, Daddy. She's coming to my party. Miss Chen is coming to our house." Emma was bouncing on her toes, her whole face lit up with joy, and Jake felt his carefully constructed world tilt on its axis. He'd planned a small party, just family, maybe 1 or 2 of Emma's school friends. Low-key, controlled, not including his daughter's beautiful teacher, who he absolutely was not developing feelings for because that would be a disaster. "That's great, sweetheart," he heard himself say, even as his mind raced through every possible way this could go wrong. Emma threw her arms around him. "This is going to be the best birthday ever. Wait until you see Daddy. You're going to love Miss Chen just like I do." Jake held his daughter and stared at the invitation over her shoulder, at the lopsided hearts and the glitter glue and the pure innocent hope of a 6-year-old who didn't understand why her father's hands had started shaking. Sarah Chen was coming to his house. They would talk outside the artificial boundaries of parent-teacher conferences. Emma would watch them interact and get ideas in her head about things that couldn't happen, and Jake would have to smile and pretend his walls weren't cracking, that he wasn't terrified, that some part of him he'd thought was dead wasn't coming back to life against his will. He was in so much trouble. The morning of Emma's 7th birthday, Jake woke up at 5 a.m. in a state of low-level panic he hadn't experienced since the divorce was finalized. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the house creak in the pre-dawn silence, and tried to remember the last time he'd been this anxious about another human being entering his space. His space. The home he'd built for him and Emma, their sanctuary from a world that had proven it could hurt them. Sarah Chen would be here in 9 hours. He got up and started cleaning, even though he'd already cleaned yesterday. Vacuumed the living room again. Wiped down the kitchen counters for the 3rd time. Reorganized the bookshelf that didn't need reorganizing. Checked that the bathroom had clean towels, that there were no embarrassing personal items visible, that everything looked like a functional adult lived here and not just a man stumbling through single parenthood one day at a time. Emma found him at 7 a.m., scrubbing the kitchen sink with more intensity than the situation warranted. She padded in wearing her pajamas with the unicorns on them, her hair a disaster that he'd have to tackle after breakfast, and climbed onto one of the kitchen stools to watch him with sleepy amusement. "Daddy, why are you cleaning? You cleaned yesterday." "Just making sure everything looks nice for your party, Em. It's just some kids from school, and Grandma, and Miss Chen." She said the last name with particular emphasis, like she knew exactly what she was doing. Jake stopped scrubbing and looked at his daughter. Sometimes, he forgot how perceptive she was, how much she saw even when he thought he was being subtle. "I want your party to be perfect. It will be perfect because everyone I love will be here," Emma said with the simple certainty of someone who hadn't yet learned that life was more complicated than that. The party was scheduled for 2 in the afternoon. Other parents would drop their kids off. He'd invited 5 of Emma's classmates, a manageable number. His mother was coming early to help set up. Everything was planned, controlled, exactly how Jake liked it, except for the variable he couldn't plan for, the one that had been occupying far too much space in his thoughts for the past 2 weeks. By 1:30, the house was full of balloons and streamers in Emma's requested purple and silver color scheme. His mother had arrived with a cake she'd baked herself, chocolate with buttercream frosting and little edible flowers on top. Emma had changed into her party dress purple, obviously, and Jake had managed to wrangle her hair into 2 braids that were only slightly lopsided. The other kids would arrive at 2. Sarah was coming at 2:15, after the initial chaos of arrivals, which Jake told himself was coincidence and not careful planning on her part to avoid any awkwardness. At 2:17, his doorbell rang, and his heart decided to attempt escape from his chest. Emma shrieked and ran for the door before Jake could stop her. He followed at a more dignified pace, trying to ignore his mother's knowing look from her position by the snack table. Through the window, he could see Sarah on his front porch, holding a wrapped present, wearing jeans and a soft green sweater that made her look younger and more approachable than she did in her teacher clothes. Emma flung open the door. "Miss Chen, you came." "Of course I came," Sarah said warmly, crouching down to Emma's level. "I wouldn't miss your birthday for anything. Happy birthday, Emma." She handed Emma the present, and Emma hugged her with the unself-conscious affection of a child who hadn't yet learned to be guarded with her love. Sarah's eyes met Jake's over Emma's head, and she smiled a little uncertain, a little shy, like maybe she was nervous too. "Come in," Jake said, finding his voice. "Thanks for coming." "Thanks for having me." Sarah stepped inside, taking in the decorations, the chaos of 6, 7-year-olds running around his living room, the general controlled disaster of a child's birthday party. "This is wonderful." His mother materialized at his elbow. "You must be Miss Chen. I'm Linda, Jake's mother. Emma talks about you constantly." "All good things, I hope," Sarah said, shaking her hand. "Oh, you're practically a saint according to my granddaughter." His mother's eyes twinkled with mischief. "Jake, why don't you show Miss Chen where to put her coat? I'll keep an eye on the children." Jake shot his mother a look that promised retribution later, and gestured for Sarah to follow him to the coat closet in the hallway. Away from the noise of the party, the house suddenly felt too quiet, too intimate. He was aware of how close they were standing, of the faint scent of her perfume, something light and floral. "You have a beautiful home," Sarah said, looking around at the pictures on the walls. Most of them were of Emma at various ages. But there were a few of Jake with her, and one of his parents from years ago. Nothing of Rebecca. He'd taken those down. "It's not much, but it's ours. That's what makes it beautiful." They stood there for a moment, neither quite sure what to say. Jake could hear Emma's laughter from the living room, his mother organizing some kind of game, and he realized this was the first time he'd been alone with Sarah outside of school. The first time they were just two people, not parent and teacher. "I should get back," he said. "Right, of course." But neither of them moved. "Emma really wanted you here," Jake said finally. "She's been talking about it for 2 weeks straight." "I wanted to be here," Sarah said softly. "She's a special kid, Mr. Morrison." "Jake, you can call me Jake. Mr. Morrison makes me feel like I'm in trouble." Sarah laughed, and he remembered that he liked that sound. "Okay, Jake." The party was controlled chaos in the way that children's parties always were. They played pin the tail on the donkey, musical chairs, and some game his mother had invented that involved passing around a balloon and telling jokes. Emma was radiant, the center of attention, glowing with happiness in a way that made Jake's chest ache. This was what he wanted for her. Always this joy, this innocence, this belief that the world was good and people were kind. Sarah fit into the chaos naturally. She helped serve cake, cleaned up spills without being asked, and joined the kids in their games without any of the awkward discomfort some adults showed around children. Jake found himself watching her more than he should, noticing the way she listened when kids talked to her like what they said actually mattered, the way she laughed at their jokes even when they weren't funny. At one point, Emma dragged Sarah over to see her room, and Jake's mother seized the opportunity to corner him by the kitchen sink. "She's lovely," his mother said without preamble. "Mom, I'm just saying. Emma clearly adores her. And I saw the way you were looking at her." "I was not looking at her in any particular way." His mother gave him the same look she'd given him when he was 12, and claimed he definitely did not have a crush on Jenny Martinez. "Jacob Morrison, I'm your mother. I know when you're lying. It doesn't matter. She's Emma's teacher. It would be wildly inappropriate." "Why? You're both adults, both single. You clearly have a connection." "We don't have a connection. We've had one parent-teacher conference, and she's been to one birthday party. So ask her to coffee, see if there could be a connection." Jake gripped the edge of the sink. "I made a promise, Mom. No one gets close enough to hurt us again. Emma's been through enough." His mother's expression softened. "Oh, honey, you can't protect her from everything. And you can't protect yourself from living." Before Jake could respond, Emma's voice rang out from down the hall. "Daddy, come see. Miss Chen loves my book collection." He escaped his mother's scrutiny and headed to Emma's room, where he found Sarah sitting on the floor surrounded by picture books, while Emma explained the plot of each one in elaborate detail. Sarah looked completely at ease, genuinely interested, asking questions that made Emma light up even brighter. Your daughter has excellent taste in literature, Sarah said when she noticed Jake in the doorway. She gets that from her grandmother. I mostly read instruction manuals. Daddy reads me stories every night, Emma said loyally. He does all the voices, even the princess voice. Sarah's smile was warm. That's a very important skill. The party wound down around 4. Parents came to collect their kids, thanking Jake and cooing over Emma. His mother left with a meaningful look and a whispered, "Think about what I said." Soon it was just the 3 of them, Jake, Emma, and Sarah, surrounded by the wreckage of wrapping paper and deflated balloons. I should go, Sarah said. Let you two enjoy the rest of Emma's special day. No, Emma looked stricken. Can't you stay for dinner, please? Daddy's making spaghetti. He makes really good spaghetti. Jake's stomach dropped. I'm sure Miss Chen has plans. Actually, I don't, Sarah said, and there was something in her voice Jake couldn't quite read. If it's not an imposition, I'd love to stay, Emma cheered. Jake tried to figure out how his carefully controlled world had gotten so completely away from him, but he found himself saying, okay, found himself in his kitchen making spaghetti for 3, while Emma chattered away and Sarah helped set the table. It felt dangerously close to normal, to a family. Dinner was easier than Jake expected. Emma dominated the conversation as usual, telling Sarah about her favorite movies and her cat Mr. Whiskers and the treehouse Jake had built in the backyard last summer. Sarah listened and asked questions and laughed in all the right places. Jake found himself relaxing despite his best efforts to maintain his guard. After dinner, Emma wanted to open the presents Sarah had brought. Jake cleared the dishes while Emma carefully peeled away the wrapping paper. She always unwrapped presents slowly, savoring the anticipation. Inside was a book, hardcover and beautiful, with an illustration of a young girl and her father on the cover. It's about a girl and her dad who go on adventures together, Sarah explained. I thought you might like it. Emma hugged the book to her chest. I love it. Will you read it to me? Miss Chen probably needs to get home. I'd be happy to, Sarah said. So they ended up on the couch, Emma between them, while Sarah read the story of a brave girl and her father who traveled the world together, just the 2 of them, and learned that sometimes the smallest families could be the strongest. Jake tried not to read too much into Sarah's choice of book, tried not to notice how perfectly she fit here in his living room, reading to his daughter. Emma fell asleep before the story ended, exhausted from her party, her head dropping onto Sarah's shoulder. Sarah kept reading softly anyway, and Jake realized she was reading for him now, her voice gentle in the quiet house. When she finished, she carefully shifted Emma so her head was on Jake's lap instead. She's out. She had a big day, Jake said, running his fingers through his daughter's hair. Thank you for being part of it. If you're feeling this story, if these moments are touching something in your heart, please hit that like button and subscribe. Because what comes next will show you that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let someone in, even when we've sworn we never would again. Can we talk? Sarah asked quietly, while she's asleep. Jake's heart rate picked up. Sure. They moved to the kitchen, leaving Emma sleeping peacefully on the couch where they could still see her. Sarah leaned against the counter and Jake noticed how tired she looked suddenly, like she'd been holding something heavy. I need to tell you something, she said, and I hope it doesn't make things weird, but I can't keep pretending. Jake braced himself. Okay. I've been worried about overstepping boundaries, Sarah said carefully, with Emma. I can see how much she looks for maternal connection, and I don't want to confuse her or give her false hope about something that isn't my place to provide. You've been wonderful with her, Jake said. But that's the thing. It's getting harder to just be her teacher. When she talks about you two, about your life together, I feel this pull to be more involved, to help more, to be part of something one have no right to be part of. Sarah took a breath. I'm trying to say this badly, but what I mean is, I need to know if I should create more distance, for Emma's sake. Jake stared at her. Is that what you want? Distance? I want what's best for Emma. And maybe what's best is if I stay in my lane. If I'm just her teacher and nothing more, even though, she stopped herself. Even though what? Sarah met his eyes, and he saw vulnerability there, and fear, and something else that made his breath catch. Even though when I'm here, in your home, watching you with her, I keep thinking about how some people fit into your life, like they were always meant to be there. And that terrifies me because I know you're not looking for that. You've made it clear Emma is your focus. And she should be. I'm not trying to complicate your lives. Jake felt something crack in his chest, the walls he'd built with such care starting to crumble. Can I tell you something? About why I'm so careful. Sarah nodded. Emma's mother left when she was 4, just decided she wanted a different life, a different family, and walked away like we were a rough draft she was done editing. Emma cried every night for 3 months asking when mommy was coming home, and I couldn't fix it. I couldn't make it better. I just had to hold her while she hurt and promise her that I would never leave, that she could count on me no matter what. His voice was rough now, emotion leaking through despite his efforts to stay controlled. I made a promise that I'd never let anyone get close enough to hurt her again, that I'd be enough, just me, so she'd never have to feel that abandoned again. And I've kept that promise for 3 years. I've been so careful. Jake. But then you came along, he continued, and you see her, really see her. You write her notes and stay late to help her read and show up to her birthday party like it matters. You're kind and patient, and you make her light up in a way I haven't seen since before the divorce. And it scares the hell out of me because I don't know how to let someone in without risking everything. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, I wasn't always a teacher. Did you know that? Jake shook his head. 2 years ago, I was engaged. His name was David, and on paper he was perfect. Successful, charming, everything I thought I wanted. But he didn't understand why I wanted to work with kids. He thought it was cute, like a hobby, but he wanted me to do something more prestigious once we were married. Something that reflected better on him. She wrapped her arms around herself, looking smaller suddenly. I kept trying to convince him that teaching was my calling, that it mattered to me, that the kids mattered. But he didn't get it. Or he did, and he didn't care. 6 months before our wedding, he gave me an ultimatum, him or teaching. Choose the life he'd planned for us, or choose a classroom full of other people's children. What did you do? Jake asked quietly. I gave him his ring back, moved out of the apartment we'd shared, started over from scratch, and for a while I wondered if I'd made the biggest mistake of my life, if I'd thrown away stability and love for a job. Sarah's eyes were bright with unshed tears. But then I met kids like Emma. Kids who needed someone to see them, to believe in them, to show up even when it was hard. And I realized I didn't make a mistake. I chose myself. I chose what mattered. She looked at Jake directly. I understand your fear. I understand wanting to protect Emma from being hurt. But I also believe that some people come into your life exactly when you need them, even if it's not what you planned for, even if it's terrifying. Jake's hands were shaking. I don't know if I can do this. Take that risk. I'm not asking you to. I'm just asking you to think about whether protecting Emma from potential hurt also means protecting her from potential joy. Whether teaching her that walls keep you safe also teaches her that connection isn't worth the risk. From the living room came a small sound, Emma stirring on the couch. They both turned to look at her, this small person who had somehow brought them to this moment. She sat up, rubbing her eyes, and spotted them in the kitchen. Miss Chen's still here, she said sleepily, and the pure happiness in her voice was almost painful to hear. I'm just leaving, sweetie, Sarah said gently. Will you come back? To visit, I mean. Not just for school stuff. Sarah looked at Jake, a question in her eyes. He knew what she was asking. Permission. A answer. A sign that maybe his walls weren't as impenetrable as he'd thought. He thought about his promise to keep them safe. He thought about his mother saying he couldn't protect Emma from living. He thought about Sarah reading to his daughter, about Emma's drawings of just 2 people, about whether his fear was protecting his daughter or limiting her. Yeah, he heard himself say, Miss Chen can come back, if she wants to. Sarah's smile was like sunrise. I want to. Emma was fully awake now, bouncing with renewed energy despite it being past her bedtime. Can we have dinner again? Like this? The 3 of us? Maybe, Jake said carefully. If Miss Chen isn't too busy. I'm not busy, Sarah said. I'd like that. They stood in the kitchen, the 3 of them, and Jake felt the careful structure of his life shifting into something new, something he hadn't planned for and still wasn't sure about but couldn't seem to stop. Sarah left soon after, but not before Emma hugged her goodbye with fierce affection and made her promise to come back soon. That night, tucking Emma into bed surrounded by her birthday gifts and the book Sarah had given her, Jake felt the full weight of what had changed. Did you have a good birthday? He asked. The best, Emma said. Daddy, do you like Miss Chen? Jake chose his words carefully. I think she's a very kind person, and I can see why you love her so much. I think you should be friends with her, real friends, not just my teacher friends. Maybe we will be. Emma yawned, her eyes drooping. I knew you'd like each other, she mumbled, already half asleep. I knew it. Jake sat there long after she drifted off, processing everything that had happened. The walls he'd built were cracking, and for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't sure he wanted to repair them. Sarah had seen through his defenses, had shared her own fears, had made him question whether protecting his heart was the same as protecting his daughter. He didn't have answers yet, didn't know what would happen next. But as he turned off Emma's light and closed her door, he felt something he'd almost forgotten existed, not just hope, but possibility. The idea that maybe, just maybe, letting someone in wasn't the same as breaking his promise. Maybe it was showing Emma that love was worth the risk, that connection could heal instead of hurt, that families could be built in ways he'd never imagined. 2 months passed, like a quiet revolution. Jake and Sarah started meeting for coffee while Emma was at school, conversations that stretched longer than intended, where they talked about everything and nothing. Sarah came for dinner once a week, which became twice a week, which became a routine none of them questioned. Emma called her Miss Sarah now, instead of Miss Chen, a small shift that felt monumental. They took it slow, careful not to confuse Emma, careful not to move faster than any of them could handle. But Jake could feel something growing between them, something real and solid and terrifying in the best possible way. Sarah understood his fear without asking him to ignore it. She never pushed, never demanded more than he could give, just showed up consistently and patiently like she had all the time in the world. The school winter concert arrived on a cold December evening. Jake sat in the crowded gymnasium with other parents, waiting for Emma's class to perform. He'd saved a seat, uncertain if Sarah would come. She'd be with the other teachers, wouldn't she? That's where she belonged. But 5 minutes before the concert started, Sarah appeared at the end of his row, her eyes scanning for someone. When she spotted Jake, relief crossed her face. She made her way over. "Is this seat taken?" she asked, even though she could see the empty chair beside him. "I was hoping he'd sit here," Jake said. She sat, and they didn't touch, didn't do anything that would raise eyebrows or start gossip. They just sat together, two people watching a child they both cared about, prepared to sing songs about winter and snowflakes. But when Emma's class filed onto the stage and Emma spotted them sitting together, her whole face lit up like Christmas morning. She waved, not caring that other kids weren't waving, and mouthed something that looked like, "Hi, Daddy. Hi, Miss Sarah." Her joy was incandescent. The concert started. Emma sang off key with enthusiasm. And somewhere during the second song about Jingle Bells, Jake felt Sarah's hand brush against his. Not grabbing, not demanding, just there. A question. He turned his hand palm up. She laced her fingers through his. They sat like that for the rest of the concert, holding hands in a dark gymnasium, while their daughter, because she felt like theirs in that moment, like they were building something that included all three of them, sang her heart out on stage. After the concert, Emma ran to them, throwing herself into Jake's arms first, then Sarah's, then trying to hug them both at once. "Did you see me? Did you hear me sing?" "You were amazing," Sarah said. "The best," Jake agreed. "Were you sitting together?" Emma asked, her eyes bright with hope. "We were," Jake said. "Good," Emma said, like she'd orchestrated the whole thing. And maybe, in her 7-year-old way, she had. They walked to the parking lot together, Emma between them holding both their hands, chattering about the concert and her friends, and whether they could get hot chocolate on the way home. Sarah's car was parked near Jake's truck. They stood there in the cold, breath fogging in the winter air, and Jake knew this was a moment that mattered. "Come with us," he said, "for hot chocolate, if you want." Sarah smiled, and he could see in her eyes that she understood what he was really saying. That this wasn't just hot chocolate. It was a choice, a next step, a crack in the walls becoming a doorway. "I'd love to," she said. They went for hot chocolate, the three of them, and it felt natural. It felt right. That night, after Sarah had gone home and Emma was asleep, Jake stood in his daughter's doorway like he had 2 months ago. But this time, he wasn't making promises about keeping people out. He was thinking about how love didn't always announce itself with fireworks and grand gestures. Sometimes it arrived quietly, disguised as a teacher who stayed late and showed up to birthday parties, and understood that broken things could heal. He'd been so focused on protecting Emma from heartbreak that he'd almost missed teaching her the more important lesson, that connection was worth the risk. That showing up for people mattered. That sometimes the person you needed wasn't the person you went looking for, but the one who was there all along, waiting patiently for you to be brave enough to let them in. Second chances didn't erase the past. Rebecca had still left. Jake had still been hurt. Emma had still cried those nights, wondering why her mother didn't stay. But maybe that wasn't the whole story. Maybe the whole story included a teacher named Sarah, who saw a little girl who needed someone to believe in her, who saw a father doing his best alone, and who was brave enough to show up anyway, who stayed even when it would have been easier to keep her distance. Jake didn't know what the future held, couldn't promise it would all work out perfectly, or that no one would ever get hurt again. But he knew that Emma was happier than he'd seen her in years. He knew that Sarah made him want to be brave. And he knew that sometimes love looked like letting go of the promises you made when you were afraid, and making new ones based on hope instead. The greatest gift wasn't a perfect Christmas or a perfect family. It was the courage to try again, to believe that broken pieces could be built into something new, something different, but still whole. To trust that some people were worth the risk, worth the fear, worth opening the door you'd sworn you'd keep locked forever. Outside his window, snow began to fall, covering the neighborhood in quiet white. Inside, Emma slept surrounded by books and birthday presents and the certain knowledge that she was loved. And somewhere across town, Sarah was probably looking at that same snow, thinking about a father and daughter who'd let her into their careful world. They were building something together. Not perfect, but real. Not what Jake had planned, but maybe exactly what they all needed. A family that didn't look like the old one, but felt like home anyway. And that, Jake thought as he finally headed to bed, was more than enough. It was everything.